He kōna I purangi tēnei nā te reo irirangi o Aotearoa.
They say life is stranger than fiction.
It was a species of bacteria called Deinococcus radiodurans. This thing is basically immune to everything scientists has thrown at it. It is immune to temperature, it's immune to dehydration, you can't kill it with a vacuum, and you can't kill it with acid. And most importantly, the topic of this episode, they tried just bombarding it with radiation. It still does its normal thing of replicating and reproducing perfectly fine.
But sometimes what we see in movies or read in books is so incredible that it obviously couldn't be possible. Or could it?
I feel like for it to even get to that stage, heaps of different various factors have to come into play at once. And because mutations don't necessarily, it's very rare for a mutation to happen on the same gene or cell. That's not very likely, but it does still happen.
I'm Brian Crump, and welcome to Sci Fi, Sci Fact. This is a podcast where we take science fiction's strangest ideas, weirdest elements, and most unfeasible plot drivers and explore if they actually could happen. Maybe they already have. And in every episode, we bring in a scientist from New Zealand's McDiarmid Institute to explain the theories behind some of fiction's more fantastic flights of fancy. If any theory exists.
I know I'm a city kid, but cows aren't supposed to look like that, right? Split up!
Well, this would explain your mutant cows, but we've got an even bigger problem.
Bigger than a rampaging mummy and monster cows?
I'm picking up trace readings of corrodium. It's a high-energy mineral, not naturally found on Earth. My guess is a meteor must have crashed around here a few thousand years back, scattering debris all over the area.
The mummy is a rock collector?
I'm afraid not, Ben. It's a powerful energy source that's very unpredictable. That's what mutated those cattle.
Now, this week's intersection of science, fact, and fiction is based on a plot driver from a sci-fi series I'm not aware of, Ben 10. And here to talk about Ben 10 and the plot driver from it, which is Corrodium, is Bill. Bill's here to talk about Ben, Bill Jia. He's a PhD candidate studying with the McDiarmid Institute. He's doing chemistry at Auckland University. Kia ora, Bill.
Hello, Brian. Thank you for having me. Can you hear me okay?
I can hear you loud and clear. Now tell me, Bill,
Fantastic.
You're a PhD candidate, so what's your thesis going to be on?
So my thesis is going to be the synthesis and study of novel lignins. Lignins are just plant molecules.
So you know what, Bill, this is the perfect topic for you, because we're talking about corrodium, and corrodium seems to me, on the face of it, to be something highly radioactive that creates mutations. But you tell us more, because you're a fan of Ben 10. Tell us about Ben 10.
Okay, sweet. So, Ben 10 was, first of all, my childhood. I still remember every day running home from school just to watch this on TV too. So for those that don't know, Ben 10 is about a family. So Ben, his cousin Gwen, and their grandpa Max, who stumbled across this watch one day when they went camping. This watch then suddenly attached onto Ben's arm, and Ben later found out that this watch had the power to transform him into aliens. Initially, he could only transform into 10 aliens, but as the series progressed, he got more powers and different aliens. In Ben 10, corrodium is a mineral that is a bright fluorescent purple color, and it was used in the Ben 10 series as an energy source by a specific group of aliens that came from the unknown system. However, not all alien species from that system were able to actually harvest the use of corrodium, simply because corrodium was very unstable and had mutagenic properties. So,
sorry, did you say mutagenic? In other words, it makes you grow funny shapes.
Yes, it does make it grow funny shapes. So in the series, what living organisms that weren't immune to corrodium, what happened when they came into contact with these is that they become warped beyond recognition. They kind of also glowed purple in a way, And then their minds became very hostile. So they lost all critical thinking abilities, Brian.
Which makes them, I guess, very dangerous to everybody else?
That is correct. So in Ben 10, what happened was a meteorite landed on Earth, and that meteor happened to contain a lot of corrodium. And so any living organisms on Earth that came into contact with it then became like this zombie alien species and started attacking everything in sight.
Right, but Ben is immune to this?
So Ben in this series, unfortunately, is not. However, he did have a alien in his watch that was immune to it. And that alien was called Ghost Freak.
And so Ghost Freak is what, like a kind of alter ego for Ben that can deal with the Corrodium and also deal with the crazy Corrodium mutants?
Yes. So yes, Ghost Freak actually came from the Honor system himself, which is why he had this immunity to Corrodium. And yes.
So there are a couple of things there. First, the watch itself that allows Ben to change into all these different forms to shapeshift. Is it powered by Corrodium, or is it just... Well, you answer that question first.
No, unfortunately, it is not powered by Corrodium. Actually, I have no idea what it's powered on, but it is not anything radioactive because otherwise Ben would not have 6 series, 6 seasons to Ben 10.
He would have been wiped out. So
yes, correct.
So it's the watch is kind of like the thing that allows Ben to survive. If he shapeshifts into the right thing, he's immune to the effect of Corrodium. But what everybody else on the planet Earth is going to turn into a zombie, or that's the kind of the plot driver. Will they turn into zombies? Will that be the end of the world, or won't it?
That would have been the end of the world had Ben not found out that Ghost Freak was immune to Corrodium and found ways to deal with such mutations.
So I guess obviously the Corrodium sounds to me like a highly radioactive element, be it
Correct.
uranium or maybe plutonium.
Yes.
That's what I'm thinking. Am I on the right path there?
You're absolutely on the right path. So as you know, unfortunately, or even fortunately, Earth has this natural protective barrier that can shield us from radiation. And because of this natural protective barrier, we as humans have not become radio resistant. However, in the case of Ben 10, because the aliens from the Honor system just had to live with such close proximity to Corrodium, they naturally had the advantage to grow, evolve, and adapt into species that can handle radioactivity. So what I'm trying to say is that although the effects of Corrodium is more fictitious in this case, in the sense that if we came into radioactive materials like plutonium or uranium, although we will mutate and that they will directly cause DNA damage, we won't mutate at the sense or at the pace that Ben 10 would have depicted in, and not to that drastic effect.
I mean, how quick does it happen in Ben 10? In a couple of frames?
So Ben 10 happens, in a couple of frames, in a matter of seconds, you're just fully mutated.
Okay, is there any, and this is a slightly macabre question, but Bill, is there any element that creates a mutation really, really fast?
Not that I'm aware of. So I think the whole concept of an element creating a mutation really, really fast is an entire myth. So yes, mutations do happen, but the rate of mutations that happen within the human body is very, very slow.
But maybe I should back up there, Bill, because for us to mutate, don't we have to have offspring? We don't mutate ourselves, do we? It's our offspring that get the mutants, become mutants, right?
I am not a microbiologist, but technically we are also mutating. So what happens in our body is our cells are constantly dying and our DNA is constantly replicating these cells to make new ones. And unfortunately, because you're trying to replicate so many cells, you will eventually make an error with your DNA replication. And unless the body repairs itself, that's what eventually will cause a mutation downstream in life.
And that's what we would call a tumor or a growth, right?
That is correct, yes.
So I know you're not a microbiologist, but how quickly can tumors grow? I mean, an aggressive tumor can grow quite large in a matter of weeks, can't it?
It can, absolutely. But I feel like for it to even get to that stage, heaps of different various factors have to come into play at once. And because mutations don't necessarily, it's very rare for a mutation to happen on the same gene or cell. That's not very likely. But it does still happen. You are definitely correct there, Brian.
Radiation mutation, however, has been a rich vein of material for science fiction. Off the top of my head, I can think of 3 straight off, and that's probably not very many. Others will probably be thinking of many more right now. Godzilla, for example, the lizard that
Yes.
its offspring are a giant, and they're really hacked off. Then you got them. Do you know about them, Bill? You might be a bit young for them,
Yes.
like I'm a bit young for Ben 10. The giant 6-foot ants.
Yeah.
They came out of the Nevada desert after the testing there. The Incredible Shrinking Man, he was out on a boat and he went into some radioactive fog after some nuclear test and he started to shrink. So that's just 3. You can probably think of more yourself.
There's plenty more, such as Spider-Man, when he got bit by the radioactive spider, the Incredible Hulk, just to name a few. There's plenty more out there.
Why is it then that radiation, again, this is maybe a chemist, not a chemist question, but I'm going to ask you anyway, why does it create mutations in the first place?
So to my best of knowledge, radiation can directly damage your DNA. And I think I mentioned this earlier, but your DNA is constantly replicating its dying cells. And because when you damage your DNA, its functional and structural integrity is compromised. That's how it will have negative downstream and undesired health effects that will eventually lead to tumors and cancer.
And mutations, the same principle. The DNA in the sperm or the eggs that we carry in our bodies gets damaged, and that creates mutations in the offspring that are born from the fertilization of those eggs and sperm?
Yes. So sometimes when an embryo is formed or forming, a lot of DNA processes happening at the same time, which obviously as a chemist, I can't go into detail. But because of so many different things happening at once, there is a high potential and chances of your offspring being mutated, which, well, technically it is mutated because it's completely different.
And we've known for a long time that radiation can kill. I mean, Marie Curie herself died of radiation poisoning, didn't she?
Yes, absolutely. So for those that don't know, Marie Curie was a very brilliant and famous scientist. She was most notably famous for the discovery of radioactive elements such as polonium and radium. But eventually, because she had prolonged exposure to such radioactive material, that did eventually lead to bone marrow cancer.
Do you know, Bill, if anyone has done a study, say, of one of the areas on planet Earth which has perhaps the highest amount of radiation poisoning or contamination? I'm talking about the area around Chernobyl. And you will know, Bill, that people have abandoned that area, and there are amazing photos that people will have seen of nature reclaiming the land around that power plant that melted down back in 1986. But has anyone done a study to see whether there has been an increase in the amount of mutations amongst animals that live around the power plant? Do you know, Bill?
Not so much for animals that I know of, but I guess another example we can relate to would be Japan. Unfortunately, we all know of the tragedies of Hiroshima, and the after effects was absolutely tragic, and there was a lot of mutations that happened which directly led to cancer and even future generations. But as you might know now, Hiroshima is now a beautiful city if you've ever been to that place. Over time, so what makes a chemical element radioactive is the fact that it degrades and it decays, not, I wouldn't say quickly, but it has that natural decaying process. And it becomes this unstable radioactive material. It decays into something more stable. So over time, nature will obviously just claim its rightful place and just, I guess, kind of void itself from any radioactive material left over from such very unfortunate incidents.
Bill, are all elements to some extent radioactive? Will they all decay in the end? Or is it just some that naturally decay, like uranium?
So only some elements would decay. Okay, so if you were talking about the periodic table, we can actually classify them into 3 groups based on their origin. So the first kind would be primordial elements. These are the elements that existed before Earth. They just kind of came with Earth. And these are, generally speaking, very, very stable. The second type of elements, these are decay elements. So these are mostly your radioactive metals, such as uranium and polonium. And yes, eventually they do decay over time, but when they do decay, some of them, not most, will decay into more stable material. For example, helium is a very non-toxic gas that we even inhale ourselves sometimes to make that high squeaky noise.
Yeah.
Helium is a direct decay product from uranium, if you didn't know that.
Yes, I did know that because we talked about helium at some point. I can't remember why. It might even have been another sci-fi, sci fact. But yeah, we talked about helium and we talked about where it came from, which was uranium decay. A lot of helium comes from that here on planet Earth. But where does the uranium come from on planet Earth?
So uranium itself is a primordial element. So uranium exists in a few different isotopes. I guess the most common one is uranium-238. This is just, you find it on Earth, like in metals and ores. But because this thing is still pretty unstable, is radioactive, it will eventually decay and give off different elements. And one of these would be uranium-235, which is the most commonly used radioactive material to power nuclear power plants.
The uranium that's naturally on planet Earth or in planet Earth, was that created by supernova, massive stellar explosions?
You can go either way with this theory. To me, primordial just means that it just existed when Earth existed. Whether you believe in the Big Bang Theory or creation, I'll leave that up to you. But yes, uranium has existed for as long as Earth have, if not even longer.
Right. And was it formed by, because, with our sun, the sun is made up of hydrogen atoms fusing into helium. Yes. And I'm just assuming that, the larger stars create heavier elements that must have been something like a supernova that created uranium.
Yes, potentially, because uranium is pretty heavy as an element.
Could some of the mutations, now this is a slight change of tack, but I'm interested in what you said way back at the start of this conversation, Bill, where you said that on Earth we don't have resistance. Our bodies are not evolved to protect us from radiation, but that's all right because our atmosphere, our magnetic field, Earth's magnetic field protects us from solar radiation, dangerous radiation. But is it possible that we could have had all the things we need for life, except for a magnetic field, and life could have evolved to withstand bombardment from radiation? Again, this isn't really a question for a chemist, but you're the closest I've got who can answer this question off the top of your head, Bill.
Potentially, yes, because once again, although we don't have that natural or I guess adaptive immunity to radiation, there's quite a few examples that's highlighted in literature showing organisms living amongst us that has very high tolerance to radiation. I guess just to give you a few examples, recently there was a species of bacteria called Deinococcus radiodurans. This thing is basically immune to everything scientists has thrown at it. It is immune to temperature, it's immune to dehydration, you can't kill it with a vacuum, and you can't kill it with acid. And most importantly, the topic of this episode, they tried just bombarding it with radiation. It still does its normal thing of replicating and reproducing perfectly fine.
In other words, I can imagine on some planet, perhaps, where there isn't a magnetic field and they're getting lots of radiation at ground level, but yet life evolves. It evolves in a way because life just wants to replicate, and it will evolve in ways that it can keep replicating itself, which in the case of a planet like that would mean becoming resistant to the DNA or whatever carries on the genetic code. It wouldn't probably be the same thing. It wouldn't be DNA. It'd be another kind of compound, because I've forgotten what DNA stands for, Bill. That's why I'm fudging that one. But it would be resistant to radiation damage, whereas our DNA is not.
Yes, that is absolutely correct. So in the Bentin example, the species notably resistant to corrodium would be your ectoneurites, loboans, thibcufans, and translians. These guys are the ones that obviously have no natural protection from their planet to Corrodium. And so as they evolved, they had to adapt and change their DNA, or the DNA just had to find a way to evolve and reproduce offsprings that were resistant. So yes.
Now, the other way of looking at this, going back to Corrodium and how it creates mutations straight away, and thinking about the impact that real life radioactive elements can have on us, and radiation in general. Now, most mutations are not good for our health, but every now and then we might give birth to a mutation. This is the theory of evolution, if I understand it right, which might be beneficial. So maybe some exposure to radioactivity could potentially bring us some benefits. I'm not advocating we go out and poison ourselves with radioactivity, but I'm just saying it could be possible, couldn't it, Bill?
It could most definitely be possible. I think there was a study done where they measured like different cities and their natural like radioactive levels, and they actually found that the cities that had higher natural levels of radioactivity, the people who lived there their whole life actually had lower chances of developing cancer, which I thought was very interesting.
That is very interesting. So maybe, just maybe, we are developing an adaptation slowly, like Ghost Freakers in Ben 10.
We could have been. I mean, unfortunately, I guess a real life example of this would be New Zealand. New Zealand has the highest skin cancer rate, unfortunately, and that's because we, at least in the mid to late 1900s, we actually found that New Zealand, there was a big ozone hole in our atmosphere. And because of that ozone hole, the radiation from the sun was directly getting through it into us and caused a lot of, obviously, skin cancer, which is very bad. So it could be, but obviously the adverse effects will also be present, Brian.
Yeah. The other thing is, Bill, a lot of New Zealanders back then were suntan freaks.
Yeah.
And, we used to go out in the midday sun. Some of us still do. You're much smarter than that, aren't you, Bill?
Yes, I always slip, slop, slap. Remember that.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Sci Fi, Sci Fact, hosted by me, Brian Crump, produced by Andrew Robinson, and of course the whole thing is made possible by the incredible knowledge of those brilliant scientists at the McDiarmid Institute. You can find more episodes of Sci Fi, Sci Fact on the RNZ Podcasts page. RNZ's podcasts are also available on Apple Podcasts, Spotify and iHeartRadio, or just about anywhere where you find your podcasts. And if you don't want to miss new episodes, well, make sure you follow us.